How many things, if you had to put on a plate all the different things or list all the different things that cause you stress and anxiety, what percentage of those, how many of those things, the 5 things, the 10 things, the 20 things that are causing you stress and anxiety right now are actually things that you can control? I bet you there would be a percentage of them that they're not in your yard, they're not in your boundaries. So why worry about it? Why cause that undue or unnecessary stress and anxiety? So when you are able to recognize what your healthy emotional boundaries are, now you can help reduce stress, reduce anxiety, reduce worry, concern. It helps identify your purpose, create clarity, build and strengthen relationships, and improve social and relational capital, which again, in your personal life and professional life, all of those are critically, critically important.
Welcome to the EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast. Like most business owners, you already know you need good business and marketing strategies to scale and be profitable. But at some point, you've hit the dreaded wall where you feel stuck and frustrated. EQ for Entrepreneurs is for business owners and leaders who are honest enough to admit that they just might be the ones holding their business back and are brave enough to change that.
We're Noble and Kathy, and every week we're having candid conversations about all things emotional intelligence and how growing that has allowed us to get out of our own way and is radically transforming both our businesses and our personal lives. This is the secret sauce strategy for modern entrepreneurs who are tired of hustling without seeing results and want to grow a business and a life that they love.
What is going on, super duper leaders, influencers, entrepreneurs, homeschool families, and peeps? Okay, 4 lessons for creating an emotionally healthy family. 4 lessons for creating an emotionally healthy family. And it's going to go with the, what do you call it? Acronym maybe of ETBR. ETBR. So the first, let me just tell you what these 4 stand for. So emotionally healthy parents is the E, emotionally healthy parents. T is triggers, B is boundaries, and then R is recharge. So those are the 4 categories that I'm going to be addressing. So the first E here, the first point here, E, emotionally healthy parents, is the first step in creating an emotionally healthy family. I got this quote from Daniel Haggedorn, and he's got a great company. In fact, I've got a podcast episode with him, episode 59. If you have not heard our podcast on EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast, some of you guys are watching live on Facebook, on YouTube, but we've got a podcast called EQ for Entrepreneurs, and it's episode 59. Daniel Haggedorn shared this awesome quote. He said, if you don't deal with your emotional issues, your children will. If you don't deal with your emotional issues, your children will. And not just your children, but your coworkers, your company, your staff, your organization will also have to deal with your emotional issues if you're not dealing them yourself. Number 2, or not, it's number 2 under the E, the best thing for kids, and I got this one from Parenting Made Practical, parentingmadepractical.com, and the Link family, amazing parenting skinny. One of the things that they've shared is the best thing for kids is stable, emotionally healthy, loving parents. The best thing for kids is stable, emotionally healthy parents. Because the more healthy and emotionally stable the husband and wife are, that creates a more stable and predictable emotional platform or environment for your children to be able to be raised up in, which is very, very helpful. You know, right now our daughter's a teenager, especially like in the teenage years. I mean, obviously all the years is important. But the teenage years can be pretty emotionally volatile because of the changes and the hormones and all the hormonal cocktail that's going on inside teenagers. So it's super important to have a stable, healthy, emotional relationship there with your husband and wife. Okay, now some 3 resources that are super helpful. Again, we're still under the E part there of emotionally healthy parents. The 5 Love Languages is an amazing book. If you haven't read that book, strongly recommend it. The next resource is Personality Plus by Florence Littauer. Excellent book as well, excellent resource. And StrengthsFinder 2.0. StrengthsFinder 2.0. Those 3 books have probably had the greatest impact in our relationship, in our marriage, in our family, along with the whole emotional growth journey. Those 3 did not necessarily address or help out with the emotional growth journey. So there's a whole nother set of books that I would recommend for specifically the emotional growth journey. Okay, now we're on the T, ETBR. So now we're on the T, which is triggers. Okay, triggers are very important to figure out. What are your triggers? What are your triggers? What are your partner's triggers, your spouse's triggers? What are your children's triggers? How good are you at recognizing all 3 of those? Your triggers, your spouse's triggers, and your children's triggers. How good are you? How effective are you? How quickly can you recognize those triggers? Here's another question. What does your spouse do that triggers you? What does your spouse do that triggers you? What do your children do that trigger you? Why are your triggers triggering? Okay, kind of funny question, but here's this is so powerful to figure out. What is the origin story of those triggers, of each of those triggers? Where are they attached earlier on in your life? Where do they come from? Where do they start? When did they start? How did they start? What is the story, the belief attached to each of those triggers? It's so important to figure out the origin story. Next, what action steps can you take to recognize those triggers sooner, to stop them sooner, to minimize their frequency, and to minimize their severity, and ultimately, potentially, to stop them altogether? I will tell you, as a result of my emotional growth journey, the number of triggers that I've had has dropped. So the frequency of triggers that I've had has dropped. The severity or the intensity of those triggers have dropped. I won't say that I've stopped them yet. I still have more emotional work to do, but lots more emotional work to do. But in my own emotional growth journey, definitely the frequency and the severity of the triggers that I have had has dropped tremendously, which is game changer, both in my personal life and professional life. Okay, so that's triggers. That's that section. It's really important to take the time to do that work to figure out. Next one is B, boundaries. And I highly recommend the book Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud. Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud. Boundaries identify what's your responsibility and what's not your responsibility. Another way that Henry Cloud describes it is what's in your yard and what's not in your yard. A lot of people have, I grew up with no boundaries. In my family, we didn't ever have any boundaries. So this is a concept that I'm having to learn now as a super, adult in my third quarter of my life, probably. And so I never learned boundaries, and again, until a few years ago. And they're so important. I can't believe I never learned this stuff. But and then I've also found that people that have the strength in StrengthsFinder 2.0, there's one of the strengths is called responsibility. That's one of their superpowers strengths is responsibility. Well, every strength can also be a weakness. And that gift or strength of responsibility, a lot of people can also have a false responsibility, meaning, and how it applies to boundaries is they can worry about things that are not in their yard, as Dr. Henry Cloud would call it. They're not in their area of responsibility. So I'm worrying about what's in the neighbor's yard. I'm worrying about what's in another state. Well, why? Why am I doing that? Why am I worrying and creating anxiety in myself for something that's not in my yard? I have no control over it. But that's another great thing to think about is how many things, if you had to put on a plate, all the different things or list all the different things that cause you stress and anxiety, what percentage of those, how many of those things, the 5 things, the 10 things, the 20 things that are causing you stress and anxiety right now are actually things that you can control? I bet you there would be a percentage of them that they're not in your yard, they're not in your boundaries. So why worry about it? Why cause that undue or unnecessary stress and anxiety? So when you are able to recognize what your healthy emotional boundaries are, now you can help reduce stress, reduce anxiety, reduce worry, concern. It helps identify your purpose, create clarity, build and strengthen relationships, and improve social and relational capital, which again, in your personal life and professional life, all of those are critically important. And here's something that I'm going through too. Again, my daughter is 13. The older my daughter gets, the greater her boundaries are beginning to increase. And I am having to be super sensitive of what her boundaries are because I want to model what I want other men in her life to model. And not just that, but I want my daughter to know that that her boundaries are to be respected. And that if someone violates one of those boundaries, she knows how to handle it. And she has a healthy, self-esteem, self-confidence, and a healthy, kind of emotional, she's healthy emotionally, so that she knows how to handle somebody that may violate one of her boundaries, and that she knows again that her boundaries are to be respected because her father respects her boundaries. And so that's a huge one too. And again, I'm having to, because they're changing, sometimes weekly, maybe, monthly, as she gets older. And as those boundaries increase, her responsibility increases, her freedom increases. Again, as long as she's managing those boundaries and responsibilities appropriately. So that's something that's really important. So that's boundaries. Okay, next one, the last one is recharge. Recharge. How do you recharge? How do you recharge? What recharges you? Make a list, man. This is so important. Stick it on the fridge. Stick it in your bathroom mirror. Stick it on a door of your house somewhere, to your pantry, whatever. How do you recharge? How does your spouse recharge? How does your spouse recharge? How do each of your children recharge? The answers to these questions are so important, especially in these crazy times that we're living in right now, where there's not a lot of stability or predictability, and there's all this, the message changes every day in the media with different things. How does your family recharge? And remember to respect your other family members' boundaries, in knowing that they may not recharge the way you do. My wife and I are very different. She recharges very different than I do. But then also, how does your family recharge as a unit, as a family unit? How often do each of you need to recharge? How often does your family need to recharge? It's so important to make sure you schedule time to do that. And again, schedule that time. Schedule recharge time for yourself, for your family. It's really important. Then other times be spontaneous, but make sure recharge time is not a time that can get kicked down the road too much, or otherwise you will implode. You will have some sort of pain and bitterness that's not transformed will be transferred. So you may think, okay, well, I can recharge later. I'm telling you, that emotional, your emotional capacity will begin to compress, and you may have some places in your life where that emotional pain or burden will be exposed somewhere else in your life. So anyway, those are the 4 areas of how to develop and create a healthy emotional family. Again, emotionally healthy parents, understanding and knowing your triggers, understanding and knowing your boundaries, and then also understanding and knowing how you recharge. And we cover a lot of the stuff on our podcast. Again, you may be listening to this right now on our podcast or on our YouTube channel or on our various Facebook pages as well. But thank you. Hopefully this helped out. If this did add value to you, please feel free to share this with or tag somebody with a friend or a family member. Have a super day. And remember, emotionally healthy people help heal other people emotionally. Emotionally healthy people help heal other people emotionally.